In 1938, researchers at Harvard began tracking the lives of 724 men. Not for a year, not for a decade, for 8 consecutive decades. They followed their marriages, their careers, their crises, their children, their grandchildren, their illnesses, and their deaths. It was the longest scientific study of human happiness ever conducted, and when the results finally came in, they were so simple that the researchers themselves said they didn't believe the data at first. It wasn't wealth, or fame, or productivity, or perfect health. The answer that emerged from 8 decades of following hundreds of human lives was a single one: relationships. People who had strong, genuine connections with others stayed healthier, lived longer, and reported being significantly happier than those who were isolated. That's simple. And yet, apparently so difficult to maintain in practice that, in 2023, the United States Surgeon General declared loneliness a national epidemic. The United Kingdom created a Ministry of Loneliness. Japan followed shortly after. Entire countries creating government positions to combat the fact that their populations are, collectively, more disconnected from one another than at any other point in recent history. Meanwhile, inside an ant colony, no individual exists outside a network of constant physical, chemical, and behavioral contact with other individuals. An ant isolated from the nest dies within days, not from hunger, not from dehydration, but from something biologists describe as progressive behavioral collapse. She stops eating, stops moving in any organized way, and simply stops. As if, outside the network, the system keeping her functional just shuts down. The question opening this video isn't philosophical. It's biological. What do ants know, at the cellular and behavioral level, about what's required to exist in a functional way, that we once knew, that is written into our own evolutionary DNA, and that somehow, in the process of building cities, careers, digital social networks, and pack schedules we left behind? Let's start with what happens, biologically, when a human being becomes isolated. The research is extensive, and the more you read it, the more unsettling it becomes. Loneliness is not simply an unpleasant emotional state. It is a measurable biological threat to the organism. Studies published over the last decade show that chronic loneliness increases the risk of premature death by 26%, a number researchers have compared, in terms of health impact, to the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's not a metaphor. That's real epidemiological data. Loneliness increases systemic inflammation markers in the blood, alters gene expression in immune cells, chronically elevates cortisol levels, and is associated with higher risk of cardiovascular disease, accelerated cognitive decline, and depression. The human organism, when chronically deprived of social connection, doesn't just suffer emotionally. It gets sick, ages faster, and dies sooner. Why would an emotional state produce such profound physical consequences? The answer lies in evolution. For the overwhelming majority of human existence, hundreds of thousands of years before cities, before apartments, before working from home, existing outside a group was synonymous with death. Predators, temperature, food scarcity. None of those problems were consistently solvable by a single individual alone. The group was the only available survival technology. And so the human brain evolved to treat social exclusion with the same neurological seriousness it treats physical pain. Neuroimaging research has shown that the same brain regions that activate when you get hit, the anterior insula and the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, also activate when you're socially excluded, rejected by a group, or simply ignored by someone who matters to you. Social rejection hurts because, for your brain, social pain and physical pain share the same alarm system. That alarm exists to push you back inside the group, because staying outside the group, for most of human history, had a single consequence: death. Now picture an ant. She doesn't process that as pain or as fear. She doesn't have the neurological apparatus that would produce that subjective experience. But she has something functionally equivalent, and one that probably came from a similar evolutionary place: a total biological dependence on the presence of other ants around her. Not as a preference, not as comfort, but as a basic condition for functioning at all. Researchers who have studied ants isolated from the nest have observed significant behavioral changes within hours. The organization of behavior deteriorates. Feeding patterns collapse. The ant begins circling without direction. In species that normally live long lives when integrated into the colony, isolation drastically shortens lifespan. Not because the food ran out. Because the network that sustained the organism's functioning simply no longer exists. What ants have never lost is what we call, in evolutionary biology, group pressure. The active, continuous, non-negotiable dependence on the presence of other organisms of the same species in order to function. They never had the option of pretending they didn't need this. We did. And this is exactly where the story starts to get interesting and unsettling. Because the first real twist in this story isn't that modern humans are lazy, or shallow, or obsessed with technology in some way that previous generations weren't. The first twist is that modern isolation wasn't anyone's deliberate choice. It was, in large part, the inevitable byproduct of systems built to maximize individual efficiency. Think about a large city. Each apartment is designed to be self-sufficient. Each person has their own kitchen, their own bathroom, their own television. Supermarkets allow you to get food without needing anyone. Delivery apps mean you don't even need to leave. Remote work means you don't need to go anywhere at all. Each innovation solved a real problem of convenience or cost. And at the same time, each one silently removed a layer of mandatory social contact that previously existed in daily life without anyone needing to plan for it. Before, going to get water meant running into other people at the well. Before, buying food meant negotiating with a vendor who knew your name. Before, working meant being physically in a space with other bodies, other smells, other facial expressions. These weren't necessarily deep interactions, but they were contact. And contact, even superficial contact, keeps the brain's social system at least minimally calibrated. When that contact disappears, not all at once, but layer by layer, year by year, innovation by innovation, what's left is a materially more convenient life and a socially much poorer one than any human being of the past would have experienced as a baseline. And here is the second twist, and it's the one most people don't see coming. The Harvard study I mentioned at the start of this video, 88 years tracking hundreds of lives, found a data point that the researchers themselves described as surprising. The satisfaction a person reported with their relationships at age 50 was a more accurate predictor of their physical health at age 80 than their cholesterol levels were. That's not a poetic statement. It's a statistical finding comparing two objectively measurable health predictors. The quality of social connections in midlife predicted how the body would function 3 decades later more accurately than the lipid marker your doctor orders every year at your checkup. What this reveals is that social connection is not just good for mood. It is, quite literally, a health intervention. And it doesn't need to be a perfect connection. Waldinger's study also found that couples who argued every day, but who maintained a fundamental sense of safety and trust in each other, showed better health outcomes than people in apparently harmonious but emotionally distant relationships. It's not the absence of conflict that protects. It's the presence of real bond, even if imperfect, even if noisy. Ants don't have emotional bonds in the way humans do. They don't choose who to connect with. They don't cultivate friendships, don't have conversations that deepen relationships, don't share personal stories. What they have is constant physical presence, uninterrupted chemical contact through pheromones, and a social architecture where the complete isolation of any individual is structurally almost impossible inside the nest. They don't need to remember to connect. Connection is built into the structure of how the colony exists. We used to be like that too. Not in the sense of an anthill, but in terms of structure. For hundreds of thousands of years, human beings lived in small groups where contact was the norm, not the effort. You didn't need to schedule dinner 3 weeks in advance to see a friend. You were simply there, in the same physical space most of the time. Connection wasn't a calendar item. It was the basic fabric of daily existence. And then something changed. Not all at once. But the direction was consistent enough that, in less than a century, we arrived at a point where 2 developed countries created government ministries dedicated to the fact that their populations are dying of loneliness. The United States Surgeon General, in 2023, described the isolation epidemic as a first-order public health crisis, using the same language that would be applied to an infectious disease pandemic. The United Kingdom appointed a Minister of Loneliness in 2018. Japan in 2021. Governments recognizing that something was lost at a collective scale large enough to demand political intervention. Now, it's tempting at this point to fall into a simple narrative. Technology bad, social media villain, smartphones destroying relationships. But the data doesn't support that simplification. Research on the impact of social media on well-being shows mixed results, highly dependent on how the technology is used. Digital contact with people you already know well generally doesn't worsen well-being and can even improve it when it replaces a complete absence of contact. What's harmful is passive use, infinite scrolling through content without real contact with any specific human being, combined with the illusion of connection it creates. The illusion is the problem, not the technology itself. Because while the illusion exists, it reduces the urgency to seek the real thing. And this is where the ant offers something genuinely useful, not as a spiritual metaphor, but as a functional model. An ant doesn't have the option to substitute real contact with a simulated version of contact. She can't follow other ant profiles without leaving the nest. Pheromones don't work at a distance. Physical antenna contact, one of the central mechanisms of social communication in ants, requires presence. The architecture of her social system is intolerant of simulation. The rheol is the only available option. Researchers in human neuroscience have identified something that echoes this directly. The impact of real physical contact on the human nervous system is qualitatively different from the impact of screen-mediated contact. Physical touch, a hand on a shoulder, a hug, simply being in the same physical space as another person, activates the oxytocin system in ways that digital communication simply doesn't replicate. Oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, isn't just a pleasant feeling. It reduces activity in the amygdala, the brain region associated with threat processing and anxiety, and increases the disposition toward trust and cooperation. It's a real physiological modulator, with measurable effects on stress and inflammation markers. And it's activated far more robustly by physical presence than by digital presence. This isn't an argument against technology. It's an argument for understanding that the human body was built for a specific type of social contact that, over the past several decades, has been progressively replaced by more convenient, more scalable, and biologically less effective versions. The ant colony made no intelligent decision in building this system. It simply never developed the capacity to simulate contact, so the system remains intact because the evolutionary pressure that created it never encountered any alternative that could replace it. We developed alternatives. More convenient alternatives, more comfortable, more controllable. And in doing so, we gradually hollowed out parts of the social structure that sustained human well-being in ways that weren't visible in real time, but that 88 years of Harvard data and a global epidemic of loneliness have made undeniable. What ants know about happiness that humans have forgotten is no mystical secret. It's no ancient wisdom or Zen philosophy. It's something far simpler and far harder to admit, that the human organism was not built to function alone, that the convenience of isolation carries a real and measurable biological cost, and that no amount of individual achievement replaces what happens, at the cellular level, when you are genuinely present with another person who matters to you. The ant didn't choose this. She has no way to choose differently. You do. And maybe that's precisely the most important difference between you. Not that she is wiser, but that she never had the option to forget what your own body still knows, even silently, even without language to articulate it, what it needs to keep functioning for real.